And in the Factor flashback segment tonight, Richard Chamberlain, back in the 50s, 60s.
At just 36, Richard Chamberlain vanished from Hollywood at the height of his fame. He left behind adoring fans, canceled contracts, and a trail of questions no one dared ask. The truth was darker than anyone imagined. He wasn't chasing new roles or exotic adventures. He was running, hiding, fleeing with a lover in secret. In an era when whispers alone could destroy a career, Chamberlain made a choice that stunned those who knew him best. What could drive America's beloved Dr. Kildare to abandon everything? To answer, we must travel back to the boy he once was, before the cameras, before the lies, before the great escape. Richard Chamberlain was born George Richard Chamberlain on the 31st of March 1934 in Beverly Hills, California. His birthplace already carried a weight of expectation, a city synonymous with luxury, ambition, and the rising power of Hollywood. Yet his childhood was not a glamorous affair. His father, Charles Chamberlain, worked as a salesman but struggled with alcohol, leaving Richard's early years marked by instability and tension at home. His mother, Elsa Winifred, tried to hold the family together, instilling a sense of order and culture even as the family's foundation wavered. Young Richard grew up in a world of contradictions. Outside, Beverly Hills was filled with elegant cars, Art Deco houses, and glamorous premieres where flashbulbs captured stars in mink coats and crisp tuxedos. Inside, Richard's world was quieter, more fragile. He attended Beverly Hills High, where the children of the rich and famous mingled. But he often felt like an outsider, too sensitive, too uncertain. He turned to art and music as refuge. He loved to paint, often losing himself in color and canvas, dreaming of becoming an artist instead of an actor. The cultural backdrop of his youth was the 1,940 seconds and 1,950 seconds, a period of sharp contrasts. America had emerged from World War II with optimism, but also with rigid conformity. Masculinity was narrowly defined. Men were expected to be strong providers, soldiers, or athletes, and anything that hinted at difference was dangerous. Homosexuality, in particular, was treated not only as immoral but as illegal, classified as a sickness by psychiatrists, and condemned from pulpits. For a boy like Richard, aware of feelings he could not name, the message was chilling. Silence was survival. By the time he attended Pomona College, Richard seemed to fit the mold of the clean-cut American young man. He excelled in athletics, looked strikingly handsome, and even pledged to a fraternity, blending into a world that valued appearances. But beneath the surface, his private fears never left him. He studied art, thinking it might be his future. But fate would soon draw him toward a different stage, one where the lights would be blinding, the applause deafening, and the pressure to hide his truth even greater. His story, however, did not begin with Hollywood fame. It began with a call to service, and a world at war that would shape the man he became. After graduating from Pomona College in 1956 with a degree in art, Richard Chamberlain was drafted into the United States Army. He served as a draftee during the Korean War era, stationed in Korea as an infantryman. The experience was harsh but formative. Marching in mud, enduring bitter cold, and living with the constant edge of fear hardened him. Yet even amid the discipline of military life, Richard kept sketching, painting, and quietly nurturing dreams beyond the barracks. When he was honorably discharged, he returned home not as a soldier, but as a young man searching for direction. The pull of performance grew stronger. He enrolled in acting classes, where his classical looks and resonant voice immediately drew notice. Soon, small roles on television followed. Bit parts on anthology, dramas, and guest appearances that paid little but taught him the craft. What set him apart was not just his beauty, though his chiseled features made him a natural for leading roles, but his dedication. He worked relentlessly to refine his skills, studying diction, gesture, and emotion. The turning point came in 1961 when NBC cast him as Dr. James Kildare in the medical drama Dr. Kildare. Overnight, Chamberlain became a household name. Women swooned at his bedside manner on screen, and men admired his calm strength. Magazines called him America's boyfriend. His face appeared on covers from TV Guide to Life. Fan mail arrived by the thousands each week, and his name was suddenly spoken in the same breath as Rock Hudson and Tab Hunter. The studio system capitalized on his image. MGM styled him as the perfect gentleman doctor, clean-cut and morally upright. He recorded pop songs to please his female fan base, and his records charted successfully. For many, Chamberlain was not just an actor, but a fantasy, the kind of man one might dream of marrying. Yet behind the adoring headlines and promotional photographs, Richard was already learning the cost of such visibility. Every contract included morality clauses. Every interview was carefully monitored. A single rumor could undo everything. By the mid-1960s, Chamberlain was more than a television star. He moved into films, appearing in productions like Joy in the Morning and The Three Musketeers, expanding his range beyond the confines of television. His classical training allowed him to tackle Shakespeare on stage and period dramas on screen, lending him credibility as more than just a handsome face. But as the roles grew larger, so too did the pressure. The higher he climbed, the more dangerous it became to let his secret slip. The image was perfect. The reality was something else entirely. At the height of his fame, Richard Chamberlain lived a double life. On magazine covers, he was the noble physician, the romantic lead, the man women longed to marry. In private, he was quietly exploring a world hidden in plain sight, a coded network of parties, friendships, and encounters that existed beneath the polished surface of Hollywood. In the early 1960s, as Dr. Kildare dominated television, Chamberlain began meeting men who, like him, lived with constant fear of exposure. There were discreet house gatherings in Beverly Hills, where music played low and blinds stayed drawn. Conversations were cautious, introductions carefully vetted. Yet within those walls, stars and artists shared stolen moments of freedom. For Richard, these evenings were lifelines. One of the most important figures in his private life emerged in the late 1970s, Martin Rabbitt, a younger actor and writer. Their partnership would span decades, though it was invisible to the public for many years. They built a quiet domestic life together, moving between Los Angeles and later Hawaii, creating a sanctuary away from the cameras. Friends recalled their bond as tender and steady, a love story written behind closed doors. In a world where marriages were often arranged as publicity stunts, Richard and Martin chose something real. But Martin was not the first. Biographers note Chamberlain had earlier romances with men in the industry, often those who understood the same dangers he faced. Relationships had to be hidden with elaborate care. Studio handlers would arrange photo shoots with starlets, fabricating love affairs to keep tabloids satisfied. Meanwhile, Richard and his companions would slip away for trips abroad, where anonymity gave them breathing room. Paris, Rome, even small towns in England became backdrops for walks where they could hold hands without fear of photographers. The secrecy, however, was suffocating. Every love letter risked interception. Every whisper carried the potential of scandal. Richard knew colleagues like Rock Hudson and Tab Hunter lived under the same threats always: one reporter, one betrayal away from destruction. Hollywood was ruthless in protecting its illusions. If an actor's private life conflicted with his screen image, the studios would not hesitate to sever contracts and erase careers. Chamberlain once reflected that the constant hiding created an invisible cage. He wanted to love openly, yet every instinct told him exposure would end everything. And so he perfected the art of camouflage, giving fans the perfect smile while carefully shielding the truth. The cost of that silence would soon weigh heavily, for fame could not protect him from rumors, nor from the relentless pressure of living two lives. By the late 1960s and into the 1970s, Richard Chamberlain's carefully maintained image began to feel like quicksand. Rumors swirled, as they did around many handsome leading men who never married. Studio executives watched nervously. The Hollywood press was hungry for scandal, and confidential-style tabloids thrived on innuendo. Every time Richard was seen dining with a male friend, whispers followed. The pressure intensified as Chamberlain's career shifted from television to feature films and theater. He starred in The Music Lovers in 1970 and won respect for his daring portrayal of Tchaikovsky, a composer long rumored to have struggled with his own sexuality. Critics praised the performance's raw emotion, but some noted the irony. Chamberlain playing a closeted artist while hiding the same truth himself. Richard felt the walls closing in. There were professional costs. Certain leading roles slipped away, given instead to actors who fit Hollywood's narrow definition of heterosexual masculinity. Casting directors hesitated. Agents urged him to attend more public dates with actresses, to pose for photographers at premieres, to silence doubts before they grew too loud. Chamberlain complied, but each staged smile left him hollow. The emotional toll was even greater. Friends recall periods of deep anxiety. He confided in only a handful of trusted confidants, fearing exposure at every turn. He withdrew at times, burying himself in work, traveling abroad to perform on stage in London, where the glare felt less harsh. But even across the Atlantic, he knew the American press could still reach him. The strain of secrecy eroded his sense of self. Every romance had to be hidden. Every expression of love risked being read as evidence. He once admitted that he lived in constant fear of being unmasked, a fear so consuming it shaped his choices in both career and personal life. Loneliness was the price of survival. By the late 1972, Chamberlain had achieved international fame, but the rumors never ceased. He was admired yet isolated, adored yet unable to be fully known. At a time when other stars were facing exposure, Richard's silence weighed heavier than ever. The crisis was no longer about his career alone. It was about the man inside the image, struggling to breathe under decades of pretense. In the 1980 seconds, Richard Chamberlain reached new peaks of fame. Shogun in 1980 and the Thorn Birds in 1983 became global sensations, turning him into a household name far beyond America. His face was on billboards, his voice in living rooms, his name whispered with admiration across continents. To millions, he was the epitome of romance, the noble hero in sweeping dramas. But inside, he carried the same private weight. By then, Richard had built a true home life with Martin Rabbit. In Hawaii, far from Hollywood's relentless cameras, they shared a quiet sanctuary. Together they gardened, entertained close friends, and created an existence that felt genuine. Martin wasn't just a partner. He became a protector of Richard's peace, often shielding him from the outside world. For years, theirs was a marriage in all but name, lived in silence, but full of devotion. Still, the old fears persisted. When a French magazine publicly outed him in 1989, Richard was shaken. Though the revelation did not destroy his career, it rattled him deeply. He had spent decades hiding, convinced exposure would be fatal to his stardom. Instead, the world was changing. Conversations around sexuality were slowly shifting. Yet Chamberlain hesitated, still wary of being too open. It wasn't until 2003, with his memoir, Shattered Love, that he fully came out on his own terms. In those pages, he reflected on the damage secrecy had caused. On the way, silence had stifled not only his personal life, but his spirit. Fans who had adored him as Dr. Kildare or Father Ralph saw him at last as a man willing to step out from behind the carefully crafted image. In later interviews, Richard spoke candidly about fear, about the burden of hiding, and about the freedom of finally embracing himself. Yet he also sparked controversy in 2010, when he advised younger gay actors to remain closeted, warning that Hollywood was still unforgiving. His words divided opinion. Some saw them as outdated caution, others as a sad reminder of wounds that never fully healed. In his final years, Chamberlain lived mostly in Hawaii, painting, writing, and enjoying the sea air. He accepted stage work and guest roles when they inspired him, but he no longer chased fame. Instead, he savored simplicity and the companionship of friends. On the 29th of March, 2025, Richard Chamberlain passed away at 90. His death closed a chapter on one of Hollywood's most complex journeys, a life that balanced extraordinary success with a lifetime of silence and eventual courage. Richard Chamberlain's life reminds us that the greatest performances are not always on screen. For decades, he played roles that audiences adored, while privately enduring the loneliness of secrecy. His story is not only about the rise of a matinee idol, but also about the cost of image in an era when being honest could mean exile. He fled Hollywood once to protect his heart. Years later, he found the courage to reveal it. The lesson is bittersweet. Love denied leaves scars, yet resilience carves its own legacy. Chamberlain's career stands as proof that talent can endure, even in silence. His later honesty offered hope to those who once saw only shadows. He showed that the human spirit, even after decades of concealment, still longs for truth. As we look back, we are left with questions. How many other stars hid the same secret? How much brilliance was muted by fear? Chamberlain's journey urges us to remember that behind every glossy magazine cover is a person with fears, dreams, and desires too fragile for the world to see. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Which role of Richard Chamberlain do you remember most? And if you want more hidden stories of Hollywood's golden age, don't forget to subscribe for the next journey into the past.